he asked, well, how would they know it's from us? And that's a true divide that we have to get past. And that for us, that was the divide to say, we're not doing it for that. We're going to bless people and show them the love of the kingdom and believe that if we can love people where they are, that it will lead to conversations and transformation. And so the field doesn't meet there. We meet next door at a building that we pay for when our building's empty. And that's where we are today, and that's really important. Okay, so a couple other things I want to mention. I want to jump real quickly to tent making. Being bivocational, I call it bivocational leadership. Leverage. Hugh's going to talk tonight about being bivocational, and it seems like more and more people are starting to think of that, and for many reasons. But it's a very biblical thing. You look at Acts, you look at Paul, you look at Acts 18, you see what Paul did, and there's really two main reasons why Paul was a tent maker. And one of them was he needed funds, and another one was credibility. And so he would work in the marketplace in the center of town all week, and then he would go on Saturdays. He would go to the synagogue, and then he would proclamate with the people that he was living life with and rubbing shoulders with and working with, and it gave him oftentimes credibility to meet the people around him. And so there is leverage here. And so here's a definition I like. It's not the only one, but Don Hamilton in his book Tent Makers Speak defines tent making as this: a Christian who works in a cross-cultural situation is recognized by members of the host culture as something other than just a religious professional. Calling, motivation, and training is a missionary in every way. Yet he is still committed to the calling and motivated to being a missionary. He's a professional missionary. Yes.
What's the source of the quote?
It's called Tent Makers Speak. That's the name of the book. And I do have a couple of copies of maybe like 10 for resources for some amazing books on tent making and other things that if you want it. But on that, I think that's the key that I just want to get at. And I just want to point out a couple of stories of the leverage you can have if you want to serve your city, if you get to do that. Now, Hugh's going to talk about opportunities and how you get paid and all that stuff. But I just want to talk about when we entered into Brewed, we had multiple opportunities to serve. And so here's a good example. So one of our homeless friends, CJ, was a guy that we met and became good friends with. And one of the things we want to do is pull out their strengths and help them, to get involved and instead of just, being above him and thinking we're just helping him. And so I asked him one day, his deal is he likes to be help for the homeless. So he's always walking around with water and stuff, helping people. And he's on an island. He's got some backstory that's caused him to be on an island. But he loves Jesus. He's been transformed. And so I said, CJ, tell me, what's your dream? What would you like to do? He said, man, I love to feed the homeless. And I love to especially when it's cold outside, to just give them clothes and stuff like that. And I said, well, okay, well, why don't we do it? And I said, you get the people, and I'll bring the food and the resources. And so we made a deal and high-fived. And so he got excited. But there was only one thing I hadn't thought of, and I found this out like the day before, 2 days before. You had to have a permit to actually bring food out if you weren't in an established church, right? And so the field was just getting started, and so we'd already picked our spot. And so about that time, I was getting hit up because I was embedded in the culture by food trucks. So all these food trucks were calling me as the Brewed guy. Hey man, I'd really like to get to know you. Can we cook for you? And all that stuff. And so the bacon wagon comes along, and so I said, hey, well, can I meet with you today? and so sure, we'll cook you up some food. And so I tasted all their food, and at the end of the time, I said, hey, this is going to sound weird. I'm Brewed guy, remember? He just met me. He's trying to get a deal with us or something. And I said, some of the Brewed people, we just like to give back to the city, and we're going to be feeding the homeless in like 2 days. Do you think he would do that for us? We'd pay for the food. And he just stopped, and just like, he's like, what are you talking about? He said, well, can I call you tomorrow? And but sure enough, he called back and said, I talked to my partner, we'd love to do that. And so they had the permit, obviously, and so they put up their shop, and we fed all the people CJ brought. And we had a great time, and they were just blowing and going. And this is a picture with the Brewed team and the Bacon Wagon guys. And what was beautiful about that is afterwards, they were like, who are you guys? Why are y'all doing this? We're a business that's about to open, and all he was thinking about is, hey, can we work with you guys? But through the leverage of business, I was able to enter into conversations, and I still talk to these guys. Through that, as pastor guy, I would have never been able to talk to those guys. They would have probably hung up on me. And so it's a neat story, I think. And here's probably the best one. Okay, so this is Gerald, and he is the owner of one of the best coffee shops around town. And so we had a lot of cool buzz going around about Brewed, I mentioned before we opened, but this was the beginning of the first kind of tension that we started to hear. And it went like this. It's like, hey, everybody in the area is all about third wave coffee and locally sourced goods, and so everybody's rallying around that and feeling, like they're taking ownership in that. Well, Avoca just moved in on the same street about 6 months to a year before we did. And so we were known as Brewed Coffee Pub in the beginning, because we didn't know we were going to be a full restaurant. And so people were saying, why would you put in another coffee shop on the same street? How dare you? We're like, whoa, what's going on here? And so that was the first time that we got to let the city know that we were going to serve by collaborating. And so for us, highlighting local was, well, that's a no-brainer. Well, we're going to take Gerald, who could often be mean, and he's quirky and intimidating, and that picture is a good representation of who he is. And we decided that, well, of course, we're going to be good neighbors, and how could we be good neighbors to him? By sourcing his coffee. And so our local roaster became Gerald. And so that was a neat deal to change that frown. And so if we were successful, then he was successful. And so we've developed a great relationship. So that's what we mean by locally sourced stuff. And so we serve them. And so our concept's different, but it's pretty powerful. And one cool story there is there was still tension about, will people leave there and go to our place when we open? And we're like, no, we have to develop this relationship the right way. And so we decided we weren't going to hire anybody from there. And somehow someone got through the cracks, and we were about to hire him, and he said he'd quit Avoca, and he hadn't. And so he went back to use that with leverage with Gerald. And I heard that Gerald wasn't happy. And I'd spent a year loving on this guy, and I was furious, like, I can't believe this. And so I call up Gerald, and then I just said, hey, I just want to apologize, because we had a policy that we weren't going to hire anybody because we value your friendship and your business, and I'm sorry. And we're not going to hire that guy, and I just want to let you know. And when I first talked to him, he was like, hey. And by the end of the conversation, he's like, man, I'm sorry. You have anything to add to that? He just instantly changed. He said, man, I really appreciate you calling. And so we hung up, and I was like, wow, that was pretty neat. And then the next day, he shows up to start training all of our baristas, because he's a guru in coffee, and his whole demeanor had changed. And I started thinking about a few things, like, you know what? I forget sometimes that, I'm the pastor guy, peacemaker guy, and just doing things that are normal as a Christian. But in the business world, the restaurant world, that's not how things work. It's like, you can piss me off, I'm out the door, I never talk to you again. And then you just start talking it up, and you just, there's a divide there. So just the fact that I just did something that any Christian would do, and just apologize and say, hey, we're not going to do that, was a big deal to him, and it's changed our relationship. And so the leverage you have through business to dig deep into relationships is a pretty cool deal. So there's a lot of opportunities for discipleship through that and walking along the way. I won't get into that, but I do want to say that diving into this gives you a great opportunity to take businessmen and women, or people that are out and that have jobs somewhere, and if you could take businessmen and women and give them a kingdom vision where they don't see themselves as JV anymore, that they could be missionaries right where they are, that's to me the pull of where you want to grab people to be part of your team. Instead of trying to persuade your church or your pastors to do something, it's the businessmen and women who for so long have been tracing the dream of just filling their treasure box to shift their view. Here's how you can use your giftedness to impact the kingdom. And it's a beautiful opportunity to lean into that and inspire them to do things differently. So for the rest of the time, I just want to go over the 6 things and then have some Q&A. So I'm going to run through this, and then I'm going to ask Jana and Lori if they want to pipe in on some of this as well. But here's the first one. If you're good, here's what we've learned, and take it or leave it, but I think it's some good stuff. The first one is, if you're thinking about anything, it needs to be a kingdom vision. And I would even add, I don't know if we knew this at the time, but it needs to be a compelling kingdom vision. And if it's just yours, and over time no one else has added to it, it was probably your idea and not God's idea. And I read this book once called The Leap, and it gave me a framework from day one when we started. And it went through all these successful people, and it did a case study, and it came back with 3 things that they all had in common. And the first one was a big idea. It was selfless.